My name is Bindu Nair, and I am the Director of Basic Research, Department of Defense. So let's go on to the next chart. So let me start by talking a little bit about basic research. And, I think as Rick said, so many people have this impression that the Department of Defense, you want to buy a submarine or you want to build something for a submarine. Well, that's your place to go, right? And it is less, and we don't do a whole lot. And if you want to understand the physics of how something works, you might go to the National Science Foundation or somewhere else, right? But the US government is really, really interesting in that we actually have a very, very broad number of agencies and people that do and fund basic research. And I think that that's actually one of our strengths as a country because we have different perspectives that come into the early research ecosystem that then funds people like yourselves that are building the sort of foundational knowledge that we start from. Right? And so DoD policy states that basic research is a systematic study directed towards greater knowledge or understanding of the fundamental aspects of phenomena and observable facts. What's missing in that is application, right? And that is by design, because a DoD basic research program or project may have a known application, it may have no known application, and it may also have multiple known applications. So part of my job is to make sure that basic research isn't being used for shorter term needs and to make sure that we are building the future. And that is really what this account is for. Let's go to the next chart. So when money comes to the department from Congress, and this is a highly complicated and very bureaucratic system, but when the money comes to the Department of Defense, it comes in these things of that we would call buckets, right? And bucket 6, which is basically, if you ever want to do some light bedtime reading, you may want to read the defense appropriations bills. And what you'll find is that they will appropriate in different buckets, right? There's like money for soldiers and sailors and airmen. There is money for buying things. There's money for healthcare. There's money for all kinds of different things within the department. Bucket 6 is what we call research, development, test, and evaluation. Right? And within bucket 6, the very first budget is basic research. 6.1 is basic research. That's the portfolio I have oversight and responsibility over. 6.2 is applied research. 6.3 is advanced technology development. Those three together make up what we call science and technology. And that is where most of our engagement with academia happens, either a lot in 6.1, some in 6.2, less in 6.3. By the time you get to 6.4 and above, mostly people are doing you're supporting big defense contractors, et cetera, in like specific things. So early research is basic research. It's a 6.1 portfolio, about, like I said, about $2.5 billion that we spend in basic research. Let's go to the next chart. So when we think about basic research, right? So this is something from a book that many of you may be familiar with called Pasteur's Quadrant. It was written in the 90s, and they were talking a little bit about basic research and what is basic research. And so if you look on the y-axis, we're talking about the quest for fundamental understanding. How basic is it? How fundamental is the question that we're asking? And then, of course, on the x-axis, we have how useful is it, right? Like, is it a useful thing or is it like an unknown but just important thing? And we do both. We do both things that are in the Bohr quadrant, which are how do we look at what a neuron is doing, or how do we look at what an electron is doing, or just can we understand what nature is thinking about and doing? A lot of other science funding agencies across the US government do that, and we do that an awful lot too. And then we have this thing called use-inspired research, which is what they call the Pasteur quadrant. And the story there is, Louis Pasteur, young scientist, coming out of school, thinking about getting employed by the winemakers in France, right? And he was asked, like, what is this gunk that's forming at the bottom of my wine barrel? And you could answer that question by sort of figuring out how to scrub it, how to get rid of it, how to do an engineering removal kind of problems question, right? Like he could have approached it that way. But instead, he really was trying to understand the why. Why does it happen? Why does it form? And what can it teach me about the broader world? And so, Louis Pasteur can do the ... from that question base that he started, essentially to germ theory, right? And that's kind of what we like to do in the department. We like to have these use-inspired questions that may answer the question we're asking, it may not, but it also, we ask the community to think broader than the question we lay out there and to build the fundamental understanding. That's what the basic research investment in the department is trying to do. So both, why does the nature work the way it works? And here's a problem. Not how do you solve the problem, but how do you bring together the questions to answer that problem, right? And that's what we like to see happen. And most of the time, that is done by our academic partners, because that's what you guys do, right? That's what you think about. Let's go to the next chart. So there you go. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things that we keep hearing about, right? The first thing we hear about is, basically the entire US government non-discretionary funding goes through the Department of Defense. There's so much money around. Why the heck can't I get my good idea funded, right? So let's talk about that. Let's go to the next chart. So here's how we fund that $2.5 billion that we talked about. When it comes into the department, it goes into different buckets, right? About a fifth of it goes into the Navy, a fifth into the Air Force, and a fifth into the Army. The Navy, Air Force, and Army will have intramural programs then happen in-house. Those are the DoD labs. About, let's say, a quarter of it goes in-house, and then about then the 75% of it is put out by the extramural branches. And for the Navy, that is the Office of Naval Research primarily. For the Air Force, it's the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, and for the Army, it's the Army Research Organization. DARPA also gets a bunch of 6-1 funding. And then the Office of the Secretary of Defense holds on to a little bit of it. We do some STEM development work. I hold a little bit of it for some high-risk programs that I want to fund. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency, Chem Biodefense. So there's a bunch of other little things that pop into the OSD bucket. Over 2/3, almost 75% of the funds go to extramural programs. Most of the extramural programs are academia, right? Like that's where you would imagine 6-1 is done. It's a major funder of basic research in math, physics, and engineering. So this is something that you should keep in mind, that we get to participate in a lot with you in developing the direction of math, physics, and engineering in the country. We are the third largest funder of basic research to universities. Let's go to the next chart. So when we look at us as we compared to other federal funding agencies as that funds universities or funds academia, obviously the big dog is HHS, so that is NIH primarily. But then you can sort of see that the Department of Defense, and now this is not just basic research, this is basic and applied research, will be the Department of Defense. We fund a lot of things, right? And we are a major funder in computer science. We are the largest funder of engineering in the country. We do a lot in the way of math and statistics. We are a significant funder in physical sciences, obviously. And then there are other things that we fund, that you may not expect the DoD to fund, but that we do fund just at a lower level than some other agencies would. Okay, so let's go to the next chart. So that bucket goes into that whole pot of money that comes in, goes into these different places. And so each program then has like not as much funding as you might imagine to work with, and they have to make choices about how to spend their funds. And that leads us to this person, the program officer, who is the key to getting to understand DoD funding. So getting to know me is sort of like not relevant to you. Mostly what you want to get to know is who are the program officers in the Department of Defense that are interested in potentially in work like you might be thinking about. Get to know them. Get to know them. If you take nothing away from this whole talk that I'm giving, get to know your DoD program officers, because they can be super helpful to you both today and in the future, right? And then, of course, people tell me, well, it is really, really hard to get to know a DoD program officer, and that is true. But let's move to the next chart. And I will tell you this, that the program officers want to get to know you just as much as you want to get to know them. They are graded on how much they bring in terms of new ideas, new concepts, starting new fields, pushing new boundaries. And so for that, they want to get to know you. Email is probably the best way to get to know them. And the thing I would suggest is go on to their open BAAs. There's Air Force, Army, and Navy ways to get a hold of their broad agency announcements, and read the little paragraph that they put out as what they want to work on. As not to say, go write a proposal on those topics right away. It is to say, here is what the program officer is telling you that he or she wants to do that year. You get to go talk to them at that point, right? Go talk to them, go email them, give them a list of topics that you think that you might be interested in. And it is a much more collaborative process working with the Department of Defense program officer, right? You get to work with them, you get to talk to them, they get to tell you, why don't you think about this? Or how would you reconfigure to talk about that, right? Don't send blind proposals to the Department of Defense BAAs. Sometimes it works. We will, of course, read it and evaluate it. But for the most part, most people are successful by engaging the program officers, talking to them about what they'd like to propose, and getting some guidance up front. Let's go to the next chart. So this is one program officer told me, hey, here's how I like to engage with people, right? Submit anytime via email some ideas. Here are three things. I read your topic description for what you're looking for in your broad agency announcement. Here are like 3 or 4 things I can do. One of them is a little shorter term. One of them is like, a crazy idea over here, like send them a research menu. And usually what'll happen is the program officer will tell you, hey, tell me more about number 2, right? Tell me more about number 2. What would you do with number 2? And you go back and forth on email, and then he or she says, okay, give me a white paper, which is when they will evaluate it. They'll get some peer review. They will tell you a little bit about, yeah, okay, this white paper looks like it's worth my time and it's worth your time. Send me a proposal. So you're not writing the proposal until you know, for the most part, that there's at least a receptive audience to hearing about what you're saying. If you are invited to write a proposal by a program officer, chances are that they are serious about funding you, or at least considering you for funding. So people who write proposals through this kind of process to programs in the Department of Defense tend to be more successful than not. However, sending a blind proposal in can be very daunting sometimes into the department, although of course we will evaluate it. So point is, get to know your program officer. And what we have found with long-term principal investigators in the Department of Defense is that once you get to know a program officer, you become part of our community, right? And it can be hard to break into the community, I will admit that. But once you begin to be part of our community, sometimes your crazy ideas, the ideas that like probably would not pass a peer review panel, right? Like, because you can't convince 8 of your peers that it's a good idea, you might be able to convince 2 of your peers it's a good idea. That's what we specialize in, right? Remember I told you the US government has this like broad ways that we do this? I think that this is where the DoD shines, right? Like crazy idea. We will sometimes fund it, and sometimes we fall very flat on our face, but sometimes it's the right thing to do, right? For the department and for the country. And so we're very proud of that tradition, and we continue to do it. Sometimes the highest risk, highest reward ideas get funded out of the DoD because of this process, because you get to work with the program officer, get to know them, and get to help them shape their program. So with this in mind, I will tell you, as young investigators, there is, of course, the young investigator programs that you should consider, but you should also consider, if you have a colleague that is going to a program officer's review meeting, or if you have a colleague that's going to a MURI review or anything like this, and they invite you along, go. Right? Like, you may not have a project, you may not, but get to know the community, get to know the program officer, pitch your ideas to him or her at that point. And there's a lot of early work that often gets done, has to get done to get to know a program officer. But what we find is it becomes a long and sometimes all of career relationship, because, you have a place to go to build out some of your crazier ideas. Let's go to the next chart. So with that, I wanted to tell you about some programs that are ongoing in the department, just to give you some a flavor of what we have. Let's go to the next chart. So when I look at that $2.5 billion, right, what do we do with it? We fund some pre-doctoral fellowships. We have something called the NDSCG, that's kind of like the NSF graduate fellowship program. We have, not on here is the SMART fellowship and other ways that have like a for graduate students, these are for US graduate students. They will have a laboratory service kind of requirement. So those are SMART, and then there's the NDSCG, which has no requirement associated with it. So we will do things like that. Most of that funding goes out to university laboratories. Programs I sort of oversee specifically, or I run, the Beneva Bush Fellowship and the Minerva projects. We'll talk about that in a second. I oversee very closely the MURIs, the multi-university research initiatives. All those topics come through our office, and we are the selection authority on all of those. The services run single investigator awards. Those are the program officers we talked about, and the young investigator programs, which again, I think for those of you that are just starting out, those are great. Most of these opportunities, especially the single investigator awards, do not have a citizenship requirement. You should read the BAA specifically. So there are a few things that we do that are tailored towards US citizens and green card holders, but for the most part, the vast majority of DoD basic research funding does not have any such limitations, and we certainly don't have any limitations on students, like where your students come from, who they are, etc. So all are welcome. We have programs that are focused on expanding the research base. So there is a program called DepScore, which is like the EP score of but defense, right? And it is the idea that there are states where we need to build research infrastructure. And so there's a separate call out for those. We have HBCUMI programs. We have all kinds of other sort of specific programs that expand the research base. We have equipment and funding and facility funding in the form of DURIPs. Now, DURIPs are programs that are like smaller. They're not the big centers that like an NSF or a DOE might fund, but these are small sort of individual lab or multiple lab sort of scientific equipment funds. And I think we may be one of the only programs in the country that sort of hit that sort of spot between what you can buy on a single investigator award and what you can buy in a center. So those are interesting. But again, the way into that is of course, as always, the program officers. Program officers are the ones that I ask to support us on the DURIPs and tell us who should be funded for DURIPs. going back to depth score for a second, in 2020, Indiana was a depth score state, and the 2021 competition is getting underway, and we're waiting for the numbers on that. But the point is that you guys are eligible for those funds too. And then let's skip the other two for now in the interest of time. Let's move on to the next chart.
Dr. Nair, if I can maybe just come in, because a question came in and it's good sometimes during the talk. Do all these programs have young faculty mechanisms, or is it really just the research funding to university labs?
It's really the research funding to university labs that we focus in on the young faculty. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Let's go to the next chart. There you go. So the Vannevar Bush Faculty Fellowship, if you're very early in your career, as I think many of you are here, you are less likely to be yet eligible for the Vannevar Bush Faculty Fellowship, but keep it in mind, right? So the second that Indiana offers you tenure and you have a bright idea for how you want to change your field, think about us. This is the largest single investigator program. I run it out of our office. It's a 5-year fellowship with up to $3 million for research with extraordinary outcomes, right? And so we're looking for very, very productive and distinguished candidates that come into the department. And not only do we help them by giving them sort of, I think the only single investigator award in the country that is larger is the NIH Director's Award. But this, in the physical sciences, it certainly is the largest award. And what we do is we sort of give them freedom and flexibility from, the churn of writing proposals while they're focusing on something really big, right? Like, I want to change my field, and this is how I want to change it. So keep that in mind as a potential thing for you to do as you get a little bit further down your careers. We will take people. One of the criteria is that you have to have received tenure, but other than that, we have people who are at the very, very end of their careers, who are basically emeritus status, and people who have just received tenure. Like, we manage that whole spectrum of folks. So let's go to the next chart. And so here's a story from Vannevar Bush Fellow. And John Rogers is at Northwestern, and he was a Vannevar Bush Fellow in 2009. And he came to us from the DARPA macroelectronics program. He was funded by DARPA. He was looking at macroelectronics, like just electronic materials kind of work, and did some good work there. And that sort of triggered for him, hey, I want to look at flexible electronics and electronics that can be put on a human body, right? And so he started this concept of epidermal electronics, and he wrote his Vannevar Bush Fellowship associated with that. And that was the time of his Vannevar Bush Fellowship, and he published his paper. It is a hugely cited paper, right? Like, it has become one of those sort of seminal papers in the field. And from there, he goes on to getting funded in a ton of patents and cited in policy, and he builds his own company, and there are all of these spin-offs from his company. And if you go, there's his postdoc funds some spin-offs, right? Like, you follow this thing down, and you come down to the point where the US Army is now taking some of the deep tissue biomechanics that came out of that seminal work, and we're now transitioning some of that, and the Air Force is using some of his epidermal electronics now for our training programs. So it comes back to the department, but after having wandered through the commercial space. And this is a very classic DoD story, right? We do the basic research. The development and transition happens outside the department, sometimes in completely new ways, and then in ways we could not have imagined. And then it comes back to the department slowly through other means. And John Rogers is a great example. We have tons of other stories like this, but this idea of seminal basic research coming back to the department multiple years later is really important to us. And we hope that you will be featured on one of our talks like this in the not so distant future. All right, let's go to the next chart. Here's the list of the current Vannevar Bush Faculty Fellows. And I look forward again to seeing some of the Indiana folks be part of this next year's class or the year after. Let's go on to the next chart. Minerva, social sciences. So we have a program in the social sciences. If any of you are interested, please reach out to me. But this idea of building a cadre of social scientists that we can engage with on like some of the big questions, like you've heard about you're all, I know, following and tracking the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and some of the how much could we have predicted? How much could we and should we have known? What was the state of the understanding in art, and how were we making decisions? Are there things that we can learn better about proxy warfare, about like how ISIS operates, how the Taliban operates, how China's building its own tech base, like all kinds of questions that we ask. And social scientists, sometimes coupled a lot with our mathematic friends, mathematician friends, to understand things like sociomath and things like this, we build into the Minerva Research Initiative. All right, let's go to the next chart.
Dr. Nair, maybe just two more questions before. First one was, how competitive is the VBFF for opportunity?
Yeah, the VBFF is competitive. I will not lie to you. We get white paper. There's self-selection at every stage. We get some very high quality white papers. We get something on the order of 250, 300 white papers. We invite about 30 back for 30 to 40 back for full proposal, and then we will get usually the class is about 10. Right, so it is a fairly competitive process, but it's also a very freeing process. So once you are a fellow, I think that there's a lot of opportunities there. And what was the second question, Rick?
Actually, the one about Minerva, and this is interesting to me as well. Does the Army or Navy also have social science research funding, or is this really the only DoD funding opportunity in social sciences?
Yeah, I mean, it is the primary one. The way the Minerva program is funded is, some of the money comes out of my office, and some of it comes out of the Army and the Navy and the Air Force, really the Navy and the Air Force primarily. And so the funding might come from the Navy and the Air Force, but we tried to brand it all under Minerva to make it just a little bit easier for people to find. That being said, we do put out some requests for things like we had a MURI on a multi-university research initiative on population and climate, right? Like how do we model population movement based on environmental factors? And how do we understand therefore where conflict could arise because of some of those issues? That was a multi-university research initiative project, not under Minerva, although it really did require a very, very strong social science component to be able to really do anything with that. Okay. So let's talk about the MURIs. And if you are a young faculty member, and I cannot emphasize this enough, and somebody invites you to participate in a MURI as a team member, say yes, right? Try it out. I really encourage you to do that. And if a colleague says to you, come with me to the MURI review, or let me take your student with me to the MURI review that I participate in, say yes. I mean, these are enormously important programs to us. They're run by the services, right? Program officers run them. And it was started in about, well, it looks like it was in '86, right? So then the then Secretary of Defense signed out a memo saying, we're gonna run this program, and they're 3 to 5 years. Teams are funded up to about $1.5 million per year. And this is interesting, right? So this is not a center. This is not all within one university or one geographic location. It is cross-disciplinary. Remember we talked about that Pasteur's quadrant? This is, to me, the Pasteur's quadrant of what we do. Here's a problem the DoD is thinking about. How would you bring a team together to solve that problem? And you pick your team, right? Like you pick where your experts come from, and you pick the disciplines that you believe need to come together to answer this question. And, it was really interesting. Like a couple of years ago, I read a Science and Metric article in Nature, and they was talking about, like, if you were to look at the grandfather of a field, right? So not who's doing great work in a field, right? Like not like where's the most highly cited paper or something coming from, but like what is the sort of paper that everybody references as the starting of this concept or this idea or this mode of inquiry. They looked at those and they said, those don't happen at big research centers or big research institutes, right? That's not where that's happening. And it actually doesn't happen with individuals either. What tends to happen is that those grandfather papers tend to be teams of about 4. DoD stumbled upon this, right? 4 to 6 people, and most MURIs are about 6 principal investigators coming together against a specific problem, right? And it has been enormously effective, right? It has been a very, very productive program for us. Couple of examples. In the 80s, we had a program on that was a Whitesides in Harvard led the MURI that was looking at things like microcontact printing and things like this, right? And developed a lot of those base ideas. And that MURI was the basis for the National Nanotechnology Initiative, right? Like, so a lot of the stuff that came out of that then was what pushed us into the NNI. In the 90s, we saw this sort of opportunity in photonics, right? Our program officers identified the opportunity in photonics and realized that we needed a large infusion of cash into that area. And so we put forward a couple of seminal MURIs in photonics, which I really think have pushed the field to where it is. If I can think about some specific MURIs, for example, that are very specific, right? Like, so there was some late 90s MURIs that were looking at IED and IED detection technologies. And every single US Army IED, ground penetrating radar or whatever sensors that we have today have their tendrils back to those 3 seminal MURIs. Like the understanding that we developed in that really has led to the next generation of IED detection technologies. So there's like very specific things to the Department of Defense. There's more broad things like we were talking about photonics, and then quantum. Since Shor's algorithm, for 20 years, when other agencies stepped back because it wasn't looking like it was going anywhere, the DoD had a couple of dedicated program officers who were just like tilting against the wind, and we're putting out quality MURI after quality MURI. And I would argue, and in fact, the interagency and the White House will agree that the DoD carried that flag and built the quantum research community to the point where, recently we've had like a lot of explosion in investment. And I believe that it was the long-term investment and strategy of the department that led us there, right? I got to take credit for something. All right, move on to the next chart.
Actually, we have a quick question about relevant to MURIs.
Yeah.
How many universities need to be involved in a MURI team? Could it actually be just a single university, or does it have to span?
So I believe I have approved a single university MURI team. It's not the norm. Usually we'll have at least 2. But if you happen to have all the pieces that you need, it is not a disqualification.
Thanks.
So this is the sort of timeline for when the MURIs come out. Next round, the white paper and inquiries are in late spring. White papers are due in early summer. We're well into the sort of selection right now. Okay, let's go to the next chart. We have opportunities to engage with our laboratories. I won't talk about this as much. Let's move on to the next chart. And we talked about the NDSCG. Let's go on to the next chart. If you have high quality students that are, again, NDSCG is specific to building the US tech base. So if you have US citizens that are that you think could be good NDSCG fellows, encourage them to apply. Let's go on to the next chart. DUREPS, we talked a little bit about this. Again, important for you as you build your capacity within your university. If you think about equipment that you need, and again, you've gotten to know a program officer, this is a very, very good way to build out specific capability that you may not be able to figure out how to fund otherwise. Let's move on to the next chart. Let's keep going. So there are a couple of things that I'm trying out. We talked about, we put out during COVID a Newton Award for transformative ideas, and these were theoretical awards. Like, what are your what kind of new sort of paradigm breaking theories should we be investing in? And I was astonished by the number of people that came to us with ideas here, which made me think that perhaps we should be building a program in some kind of, theory-based, or like thinking about how we fund theory a little bit differently than we do right now. Really great ideas and really fun projects that we funded. We do a lot in terms of international collaborations and figuring out how to work with, certainly our Five Eyes friends, but also other people to understand how do we build collaborative agreements with other countries so that we can do exchanges in areas of importance. Let's go to the next chart. I want to leave some time for questions and thinking. Depth score. This is you guys were a depth score state, and so we have depth score programs that are out there, and we have a call for depth score ideas. I think that just closed for this year. We think that we think it's an interesting program because what it does for us is it gives us the opportunity to come and speak to places that don't get as much in the way of DoD funds. We run some conferences each year that sort of talk about how to engage with the Department of Defense. We bring some program officers to the depth score meetings so that you can get to know them. It's a way to build that relationship with DoD program officers. So if you see a depth score DoD day and it's within sort of driving distance or a short flight and you want to do it, it might be worth your time, especially if you look at what program officers are going to be there. Come and check us out and come and talk to the program officers who are going to be funding that next level, the next year's depth score program. So we have a couple, I think we have one in South Dakota coming up. It's all been a little crazy because of COVID, so we've been pushing everything off. But I think in the spring we're going to go out to a couple of activities, and so I would encourage you to join us if you can. And Rick, at some point, I'm going to expect that you will be inviting us to host a depth score day at Indiana, and we'd be happy to, we are trying to make sure that we cover as much of the sort of country as we can. Let's go to the next chart. And then my office also has a lot of responsibilities beyond research funding. So let's go to the next chart. And really what we are is the liaison between the academic community and the department. And because of that, I sit on a ton of really boring committees in the White House that would look at research environment issues, right? Like research security, business, engage academia, all that stuff we and represent the department. I mean, I just saw research in um, that we had. I mean, so there's all we do. So we are engaged with the interagency on the academic environment. So if you have issues that you'd like to talk to me about perspective, something that we can do, respond a lot. We spend a lot of time responding to bright ideas from Congress on research and national security issues. So with that, I think that's what I have for you. Let's hear from.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dr. Neer. Before we go to turn to the more general questions, I also want to clarify that this event is being hosted by the Office of Federal Research Relations, and Laura Colton can introduce yourselves later. I'm just an MC, so that it's their office that is putting this on for the entire DA University. So again, those are going to be more from them a little bit later on in the event. But I can start going through some more general questions that have come up. Is there a long-term plan for what research is investing in? How do I know the priorities?
Yeah, so this is a consistent discussion that we have, right? So every undersecretary comes in and says, here are my priority areas, right? Here are the things that I want you to work on, and tell me how you're supporting what I want you to work on. And my answer to them, and I've had 2 undersecretaries I've dealt with so far, so in this role. So Mike Griffin came in, who was, he'd been the NASA administrator, and he came in as the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. And he said, Bindi, this is what I want you to work on. Here are my priorities. Tell me how your programs align to my priorities. And I said, so sir, here's the thing, right? If I align to your priorities, I am giving up the future, right? The future comes from ideas that come from around everywhere. And you are the people that create and structure the future. So if I look at our MURIs, say, Multi-University Research Initiative topics from 2009. So I showed him this. I said 2009, the then Assistant Secretary of Defense Research and Engineering had these, 7 priority areas. And if I were to look at the MURI topics and I aligned them to those 2009 topics, I was about 35 to 40% aligned with the priorities of the then Assistant Secretary. I took that same topic list and I aligned it with Mike Griffin's list in 2019, and we were at 60% alignment. That's what we need. We need you to be defining what the next priorities of the department are in the basic research portfolio. That is really, really important. Obviously, please feel free to go take a look at our priority modernization areas: biotech, quantum, autonomy, AI, cyber. I mean, like, those things are obvious in some ways, and you can certainly find the list of things. But what are the things, hypersonics? I mean, what are the things that are going to be emerging that we need to be paying attention to? That I need to be writing MURI topics on and other research in today, so that 10 years from now, when whoever is sitting in my spot is answering to the next undersecretary, they can show them that the stuff we invested in today is defining the priorities of the department's future 10 years from now. That's what we need to be doing.
Thank you. Another question: are all the programs you've outlined annual? Are there specially focused opportunities around specific topics?
Oh yeah, there is. There is so many specially focused topical areas that pop up from time to time. Like when we started seeing all the sort of things that were going on in disinformation, for example, we built a socio-math program, and that was a one-time need, right? A one-time proposal. And the Space Force is doing a bunch of those. Like there's a ton of these that are sort of one-time. The Newton Award was a one-time activity. So there's continuously going to be those things. But the programs, for the most part, that I talked about are annual and happen continuously every year.
Okay, thanks. Can you describe the proposal review process? How similar is it to the NIH or NSF?
Yeah, it is similar in that we always get things peer reviewed, right? Like so, but it is not like the NSF or NIH in that there is no sort of panel that we empanel, and and it is not as formal a process, meaning you don't have like people put on a panel, you're all reading at the same time and you're all determining. What we have is a lot of DoD folks and other US government people that are reading proposals. And then when you think that something may be, especially in the single investigator award, when you think that something is like coming to the forefront that you do want to fund, you will find a group of external reviewers and send it out to them to sort of get a reality check, like, no, this is just never going to work, or hey, that's an idea, let's try that. So we do, and the thing about the DoD program officer is that he or she is often given a lot of leeway in overriding a recommendation. And the reason we do this is we look at the why, right? Why did somebody say this isn't going to work? Like if it doesn't work for fundamental reasons, then no one's going to fund it, right? But if it doesn't work because it doesn't fit into this priority area quite right, then we may say, you know what, that's okay, we want to open a new priority area, or it won't work like this, but it's going to require this other thing to happen. We're like, well, maybe we'll find another program to start that particular process. So we do allow ourselves a lot of freedom and flexibility in pushing open that envelope, and so we can override. We try not to override scientific reasons, but we can override like programmatic decisions fairly often.
Well, that's very refreshing, actually, to have that flexibility in an agency. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Any last questions for Dr. Nair? All right, Dr. Nair, again, thank you very, very much. And on behalf, actually, of the Office of Federal Research Relations, Laura Colton is here. And actually, she is our IU representative and does an excellent job as being the federal relations for the agencies back in DC. But thank you very, very much, Dr. Nair. There's a very, very useful sort of presentation that really does underline the difference between the DoD and the other agencies that is essential to know for new faculty or younger faculty or established faculty, in fact, if they haven't done DoD funding before. It was excellent.
Absolutely. Yes. So we look forward to seeing many of you engaging with us. So thank you so much. And thank you, Laura, for the invitation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.